Welcome, everyone, to Ecopsychology Voices, an interview series with some of ecopsychology's luminaries. Hello, my name is Carol Cozio, and I'm the founder of the Canadian Ecopsychology Network, the host of the series. Linda Bazal and I co-created this program. Today, I will be in conversation with Dennis Merritt about Jungian ecopsychology for youth. Dennis has an MA in Humanistic Psychology from Sonoma State, a PhD in Entomology from UC Berkeley, and is a graduate of the Zurich Jung Institute. He practices as a Jungian analyst and an ecopsychologist in Madison and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Welcome, Dennis. Thank you for sharing your time and wisdom with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So, Dennis, can you tell us how you came up with the ideas in the 4-volume series, The Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe, and what is Jungian ecopsychology?
Oh boy, that's about 30 years of my life there. Actually, a lot more than that. My wife and I put on a week-long series back in 1991 called Spirit in the Land, Spirit in Animals, Spirit in People. And it was an experiential and didactic approach to the environment, attempting to integrate science, Jungian psychology, and Native American spirituality. We did that for 2 years, and then we did an extension program for teachers, and it got some of the highest ratings ever. That was back in 1991. And the talks that I gave there became the genesis for my books. And basically, I'm somebody who comes up with a theme or a title, and I came up with the title of The Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe. And it wasn't until I worked on this for about 20 years that I realized why I called it that. And it's because I grew up on that dairy farm. I think you have that on the screen now. That's the farm I grew up in Wisconsin, up around Green Bay. And we expanded to 25 cows. All our cows had names. So I established a deep connection with animals and the land by growing up on that dairy farm. We had a lot of so-called wasteland, river bottom, marshes, and so on. And I took all the 4-H club projects, songbird study, forestry. The last one was insects, and got totally fascinated with that. So that's where I established my connection. But you can see we're at a dead-end road. My father was bipolar and severely depressed. And when I was in the 7th grade, I was quite depressed myself. I had no spiritual background. My parents were agnostic at best, and life just seemed awfully shallow. And that's when I began my search. So I thought maybe science had the answer. So I read a lot of science, got interested in history. And then what really struck me was Thoreau's Walden Pond. And that was very intriguing. I like the idea of the transcendental philosophy. And then I read Classics Illustrated on the Life of Jesus. And I was amazed. All I knew was about rural religion, rural Protestantism, and Catholicism in mid-50s Wisconsin. And my parents would tell me how their Catholic neighbor didn't go to their son's wedding because he married a Lutheran girl and all that. So that's what I knew about religion. It seemed pretty ridiculous. But in reading this basically illustrated comic book of the King James Version, I thought, wow, the Sermon on the Mount, and I was hungry and did you feed me and all that. How did they get from that to what we see now? So that's when I began my search. But it was very difficult because there was this religious views about 6-day creation on one hand and then science on the other. And it wasn't until I was finishing my doctorate in Berkeley in insect pathology, microbial control of insect pests, so you don't have to use chemical pesticides, that I discovered Jung. And I thought, wow, here's an opportunity. Here's a way you can integrate science and spirituality, and talk about spirituality as it manifests in many different forms, different parts of the world, different time frames, and so on. So the Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe, I realized that all this work I've been doing all these years has been an answer to myself in the 7th grade. So when I think of a program for youth and where the youth are now, especially the nuns, I think about 30% of the young people are none of the above when it comes to religion, but a lot of them have spiritual interest. I think the answers that I developed for myself could be very relevant to young people of today.
So what is a Jungian ecopsychology?
Well, start off with what ecopsychology is. It's study of our attitudes, values, perceptions about the environment and our behaviors. Deep ecology is part of that. It looks for the deepest possible analysis of our relationship with the environment. And my premise is that Jungian psychology, by working at the archetypal and mythic level, and myths being the basis of dreams and rituals ultimately, is the deepest possible analysis. And then another aspect of ecopsychology is that we're capable of connecting with the land far deeper than most of us realize. And a Jungian way of working with dreams, especially big dreams and dreams of sacred landscapes, which is how I got deeply into the land through Jungian psychology. What Native Americans called spirit animals, spirit weather, spirit plants, and so on. That's an inner way of connecting with the land, similar to the outer. So Jungian psychology brings a framework for looking at the land, analyzing our dysfunctional relationship with the land and with each other at very deep levels. And it's integrated, it starts at the intrapsychic level. So if you think of a dream, this is a standard part of my talks and ecopsychology workshop. If you think of a dream that you're in, and there are several other people that's in the dream as well, then your dream ego is closest to your conscious state, but who are those other people? So they're personifications of aspects of your own psyche, things that you're not that familiar with yet, not that connected with. Your shadow side, things you don't like to know about yourself. That's kind of a Gestalt therapy way of looking at it, but it's also much more than that. That's kind of the other. And particularly, and this is a link where you can link the humans, if you will, with nature, an idea that I really liked. If you think of, for a man, and you dream about a woman that's very mysterious, well, as a human being, a woman is a member of our species, but in so many ways they're so totally different and wonderfully different, and vice versa. So then you think of these songs where you sing about, you heard about somebody climbing the highest mountain or swimming the deepest ocean for a woman. Well, that's ultimate value. That's a lot more than one conscious human being is worthy of, if you will. And Jung said the opposite sex at their deepest level is a function of the self. In Christian terms, it's like the face of God. And that fascination and that lure lures you into something bigger than yourself. But that other could just as well be an animal that appears in a dream in a very sacred way. And for me, it was a sacred environment. My last year of training in Switzerland, a lot of big dreams, and one of them was of a typical Wisconsin meadow or pasture scene. Very simple, hayfield, some insects, being an entomologist, there had to be some insects in there. Gently rolling topography, trees on the horizon, beautiful summer day, blue sky, puffy white clouds. That was it. Very simple. Nothing like the Canadian Rockies, Swiss Alps, or whatever, but every atom in that dream had an inner light. It was a numinous dream, a sacred landscape. I've used a lot of ideas then from the way Native Americans relate to spirit animals and so on. I took that image in this sense, if my soul looked looked like a landscape, this typical meadow scene would be what my soul would look like. So I have found two places in Wisconsin in particular that I really have connected with, and I go there as often as I can. I exercise at Atwater Beach in Milwaukee, county of Milwaukee, and I go there and I tell myself, this is what my soul looks like if I went out this morning on June 5th at 7:15 in the morning. And then you look at every element in the environment. These are elaborations of what your soul is. And it's not a static thing. It changes by the hour of the day, by the season, and so on and so on. So that's what one of the things Jungian ecopsychology can bring to the movement. But the biggest thing that I've been emphasizing since I was at the Analyst and Activism Conference in Prague in 2017 is that picking up on Jung's emphasis of a paradigm shift. In 1940 or 41, he coined the terms New Age, Age of Aquarius, for a paradigm shift he saw had to come in the West. And I think that's what we should be emphasizing, not just climate change or lack of species biodiversity, but what radical ecologists are calling for, talking about a total shift in our educational system, our therapy system, our politics, our social systems, and so on. It's that major a thing.
Wow. Jungian concepts are very complex, and talking about paradigm shifts in education, how would you apply a Jungian ecopsychology? What would that approach look like in a K to 12 school curriculum, for example?
Well, maybe to set that up, we could look at that slide about the layers of the collective unconscious.
Okay.
I think you have that one there. Slide 2, yeah, there it is. This is one of my favorite slides, and this would be a framework for in some of the essential elements in a K through 12 system. Jung, I think, published this in 1925. So what you see is a light white layer on the top, and then dots and diagonal lines toward the bottom. So at the very peak of each of those little mountains, if you will, that would be an ego in 3 different cultures, an individual. And then just beneath that, what Jung B would be the family level of the unconscious. And it goes on down. So I'll just go through that. And these are some of the elements that would be in the K through 12, especially when you get into high school. So I think that what the kind of psychology that we teach in schools is really lacking in many ways. I think many Jungian concepts are important for helping young people understand themselves and their environment. So in terms of the ego, this idea, what I said before, the idea of the shadow, the anima, the animus. For high school kids, members of the opposite sex, that's big stuff. But what is not taught is like the spiritual dimensions of what the opposite sex represents, the way I just talked about that. And something about your own shadow, the people you don't get along with well, and so on, the people that you envy, those are positive aspects of your shadow. And then the next layer down, B, the family level. Again, this is basic psychology, attachment theory, the connection that you had with your mother as an infant really determines how safe you feel in the world. And if you had a poor attachment, which 40% of the people don't, one of the main aspects of that are anxiety. And their archetypal image for a great attachment at the spiritual level, the Catholics have, the Madonna and Child. That's a perfect image for attachment at the transcendent level. Then you go down just below that white top layer to where the dots are, layer C, Jung called that the clan level. I think that's more like the extended family. Well, let's go down to D in the collective unconscious. And to me, this is a way of demystifying the unconscious by looking at the layers. That would be the national level. So you think of what are the myths, if you're talking in a Jungian way, you're looking at the archetypal mythic level. The myths in America are the cowboy, those politicians like Bush and Reagan who want to look like they're cowboys. That myth has really affected how we as Americans think of ourselves. We're conquering the Wild West, we're subduing the savages, progress and all that sort of stuff. But another myth in terms of gun violence is the Minuteman. The Minuteman, it was, they were the people that rose up out of the farming stock and so on and overthrew this oppressive British government. And that's a myth that's at the basis of like the NRA. The idea that you have your sacred Second Amendment is ultimately the idea that you can take up arms in a paramilitary fashion and overthrow the government. Then you go down to the next level, the cultural level, and that would be East versus West. For example, in our Western culture, the tremendous effect on how we look at the environment came through Christianity. So you go, and Jung was the son of a Swiss Reformed Protestant minister, and his mother was from that heritage. And Jung said about Christianity is that it cuts us off in many ways from nature, from animals, from the feminine, sexuality, and sensuality. And then when you start off with God saying to subdue the earth and be fruitful and multiply, where is the environment in that? Where's that natural connection with nature? And so that's at the Western level. And as an aside there, what Jung picked up on, he really emphasized the importance of staying within your cultural tradition. Rather than going to the East, for example, he said, look at what we had in the West. And then that's what he found out with the alchemists. There were these, before science, the alchemists were looking at their retorts and vessels, putting stuff in there, heating it up, seeing all these changes. And Jung said they were projecting the post-Christian unconscious into those vessels. And they were dealing with the things that Christianity had left out. And they were trying to re-sacralize nature, Christianity, and with the help of Newton and Descartes and so on, really turn nature into something that was just the material realm, could be described mathematically. That's all part of a Western heritage. But then you go to the deeper level, level F, and this is something that all cultures share. Jung talked about the importance of relating to the 2-million-year-old man within. I like to call it the indigenous one within. We've all had indigenous roots. My roots are, my mother's Czech descent, so Slavic, but also a lot of Germanic. So all those Teutonic myths and so on. And Jung thought that those in Europe, that connection with nature had been subdued and paganized and demonized by the Christianity, but it didn't disappear. And beneath that level G, what Jung called the animal ancestors, Jung said that the indigenous peoples were very close to the animal realm. And for me, the model for that is the Native American spirituality. I've had about 30 years of experience, been blessed with that, with Lakota Sioux, sweat lodge, pipe ceremonies, and Sundance ceremonies. So really some living experience with ritual. And that indigenous connection with nature, spirit animals and so on, and ceremonies, that is potentially a part of it, but we've lost so much of that in the West. So that is very quickly a model that I would use in a K through 12 system. Then we can look at, I think you have a slide about different elements of that system. There we go. So just quickly go through it. So in that system, I would use Jung's ecological model of the psyche. I said that starts at the intrapsychic level, and the self as an ideal framework. The self, the idea there is that there's something in the psyche that is a center and centering element, and that's what kind of puts our dreams together, if you will. And it links all aspects of our psyche, the consciousness and the unconscious. And at its more archetypal level, the mythic level, that's when we get the big dreams. And the idea in Jungian psychology is you hope that the person finds their image of God, their spirit animal, their spirit landscape, or whatever. That is that, like the touchstone then, and the foundation in your psyche. But at the cultural level, it comes out as a Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha or Wakantaka and so on in a Lakota tradition. So that is a way of, that would be the basic framework. And then, as I mentioned before, teach psychology using the idea of the shadow, projection, anima, the animus, and the self. Instruct about archetypes and the evolution of the Western symbol systems as related to Christianity. Jung thought it was really important that we understand how we got to this place in our culture, not only poorly relating to each other, but also poorly relating to our unconscious and especially to nature. And there a book that really talks about that very nicely is Richard Tarna's book, The Passion of the Western Mind. There aren't many books that go back to the pre-Socratics, come all the way through the Renaissance and the cultural movement countering the Protestant Revolution and so on, and an understanding of Jung and Freudian psychology. But that's one book that does it. That would be the type of book I would use. Incorporate a sense of the numinous. Where do we have that in our educational system? You try to talk about myths or something else, you're going to get flack from the fundamentalist Christians. But Jung said if you don't have a sense of the numinous in your culture and your educational system, it's not a holistic system. One thing, next level, use age-appropriate dreams, fairy tales, and movies to engage and educate the students. Most people are fascinated with dreams. Jungians, I think, will always have an emphasis on dreams, but even the Freudians have lost an emphasis on dream work in many respects. So you can use, for example, I live in Wisconsin, a lot of Packer fans. One of my clients some years ago had a teenage daughter, and she dreamt about a sacred football. Well, the Packers are pretty sacred in Wisconsin, so you use that, you talk about it. But you develop that symbolic way of looking at life, which we've lost largely in the West. Even the anthropologists don't have a sense of it. By working with fairy tales, my best training on how to work in a Jungian manner was practicing analyzing fairy tales at the Jung Institute in Zurich. One of the big 3 final exams was a fairy tale exam, where they lock you in a room for 6 hours with a fairy tale you never saw before. You had to come out with a typed interpretation graded by 3 fairy tale experts. So you got into groups and practiced. I took Marion Woodman's place in her fairy tale group. And then that's how you learn how to look at things symbolically. But you can teach that stuff to kids especially. But then you look at movies. One of my blog articles, Hunger Games from a Jungian, political, and environmental perspective. And you can look at music. Leonard Cohen's song, Suzanne, perfect illustration of this mythical dimension, mysterious dimension of the feminine. Then the next slide on that. Native American stories and films at all grade levels. I looked at that video you sent me, Carol, about not appropriating and so on. But this would be one aspect of it. Here in Wisconsin, when we did the Spirit in the Land, we had a Ho-Chunk storyteller came and told us about some of the stories about like the Wisconsin Dells and the animals and so on. That's from their tradition. Then we can share that from our Western tradition, how we look at these animals and so on. But ultimately, you want to get back to the original sense that inspired any human being. Like if you're around an elk, just really get into it, as Hillman said. Study that elk, smell it, learn its habits and so on, before you get into what does an elk symbolize in this tradition and that tradition. Then beginning at the high school level, explore the myths of Hermes, who was worshipped as a phallus and could easily fantasize about sexuality. Hermes is an incredible god to study from our Western tradition. And he is the god of businessmen, psychologists, shamans, and advertising personnel. And the myth of Hermes stealing Apollo's cattle is the way the Greeks integrated science and the humanities. Next one, discuss and show films about Native American vision quest. To me, a model for young people is the vision quest. Jungians talk about the self, mostly second half of life stuff, but to do a vision quest, I only did a 2-day vision quest, and it was amazing what happens. The idea is when you stress the psyche, it rallies, and you hope to have some sense of your essence that comes out of that. And these, the Native American vision quests and stories, and there's a film called Emerald Forest, came out years ago, illustrates that from the, one of the Amazon tribes. And the last one, describe Hermes as a god of complexity theory, alchemy, and so on, as I mentioned. If you think of each Greek god and goddess being kind of the essence of basic elements in the environment, and then you look at Hermes, Hermes is now, for those of you who understand something about complexity theory, that's this an incredible new mathematics that began to emerge in the 1960s. And its attributes are basically the domain of Hermes, about the emergence of new phenomena, about different levels of things, and morphing up to higher and more complex and integrated things and so on. So that's a way that you can integrate the humanities and the sciences. And to me, the application of complexity theory to Jung's ideas took care of some of the basic problems I, as a scientist, had with Jung, the way he talked about the self. So that's a blitzkrieg through how this would look in our educational system. I've written about this in that volume, Jung and Ecopsychology.
Thank you, Dennis. That's a very comprehensive approach, contra to what's happening today. And yet I have to acknowledge that our youth are being stressed and traumatized by the environmental denigration that's happening. And I'm thinking about Hillman's idea of the pathology of the world reflecting the challenges facing our youth today. And how would you respond to that?
Well, I'm so glad you brought up Hillman. He's been an incredible influence on me. You start off with Hillman saying that the pathologies of the world are finally making humans aware, we Westerners, that we are part of the environment. Something that Republican Party still can't admit, that which is quite a commentary on our political system. And he said, just like the pathologies, mostly of sexually abused women that came in to see Freud in the late 1800s, made Freud aware there was an unconscious, so the pathologies in the environment are making us aware that, wow, we must be part of the environment if we can mess it up, what we're now calling the Anthropocene era. So you start with that, and what I'm so concerned about the young people is that all we're hearing about is how terrible things are and how terrible they're going to get, and we're not offering them any comprehensive way of understanding how we got here and then what we can do about it and how we can go forward. So I personally think, I mean, I've been an environmentalist since at least my freshman year in high school. I grew up on a farm, had this connection with nature. I had this great high school science teacher, this incredible biologist. And Rachel Carson had a big influence on me. Her book came out the year I graduated. That's why I went to become an insect pathologist instead of a spray jockey in entomology. But what do we offer young people now? And so in this addictive culture we had, Jung said, you told Bill W., who started AA, he said, you can't just tell somebody to stop drinking. You got to have something equally powerful to replace it. we should have some models for young people, and this whole idea of the self and the sacredness of nature and the importance of community. That's all consequences of the idea of the self, um, and some understanding in these broad and deep levels of what our major influences are at the mythic level, let alone the political levels and so on. So it's like when I was 1A for the draft for the Vietnam War 3 times. And I had no idea about the history of Vietnam and how we got to that place. Coming from my background, neither one of my parents went to high school. My dad was in World War II in France. This is your generation's war. I just felt totally bummed out. I had to do a lot of educating to find out how we got into that mess and how we were looking upon the South Vietnamese, et cetera. And that same kind of breadth of understanding young people need about the environment now. So I personally, I think Jungian ecopsychology has one of the best environmental things that can be offered because of this broad framework and holistic framework.
And Dennis, I think that's a great spot for us to finish our conversation and to allow our participants to have a chance for some Q&A. So thank you very much, and I'm going to end your recording right now.
Thank you.